I talk to a lot of friends all the time who are like, yeah, like I want to start a company, but I feel like I need a PhD or I need this, I need that. You don't need any of that. You just have to like have the passion, have the drive, and you can surround yourself with people who are smarter than you and who can help you learn and grow.
Welcome to the Business for Good podcast, a show where we spotlight companies making money by making the world a better place. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and if you share a passion for using commerce to solve many of the world's most pressing problems, then this is the show for you. What's up, friends? Here we are at episode 49 of Business for Good. What a ride it has been. I was especially heartened to hear recently from one very regular listener, a successful serial entrepreneur who will go unnamed for the moment, that he is working on a really cool business idea to advance the sustainable protein movement at this time. After discussing it with him, we agreed that when he launches this new business, we're going to have to do an episode. So get excited. Stay tuned on that. I promise it will be worth the wait. And speaking of regular listeners, I do want to thank Brian in Maryland, who recently kept it quite real with me and told me that while he loves the show, he sometimes just doesn't love the audio quality of it. You know how they say that a real friend is someone who tells you not what you want to hear, but what you need to hear? Well, Brian is obviously that kind of friend. As a result, we have now switched recording platforms, with this new episode being the very first one on the new platform. And I think you'll see it's certainly an improvement. I'll be eager to hear your thoughts, so please let me know, and you can thank Brian if you like it. And if anyone deserves the best audio quality, it is certainly this episode's guest, Kimberlie Lee. So think about how many plants there are on the planet. Hundreds of thousands of different species. Yet when you look at plant-based meats, nearly all of them are made with one or more of just three of those plant species: soy, wheat, and pea. And there's good reason for it. Those plants are relatively cheap and plentiful. They taste good. They function quite well as alternative meats under certain conditions that have been studied at length. But what if it were possible to make meat alternatives with a different species than one of those three? In fact, a species so different, it's not even a plant at all. That's exactly what Kim Lee of Prime Roots is doing. Instead of seeking to build a supply chain for a new kind of plant protein, Kim is creating her own supply chain for making animal-free protein, brewing a fungus called Aspergillus oryzae into whole food meat alternatives. Now, for those of you not familiar, fungi are not plants, nor are they animals. They're an entirely different kingdom of organisms that we call fungi. We typically associate fungi with mushrooms, but mushrooms are really just kind of like the fruiting body of the fungus, kind of like an apple on a tree. And in fact, most fungal species don't even produce mushrooms anyway. But back to Aspergillus. It's also known as koji, and humans have been enjoying this particular fungus for centuries in the form of soy sauce, miso, sake, and more. But rather than using it as a processing aid, Kim's startup Prime Roots is simply using fermentation to collect the biomass of that fungus itself and turning it into not a plant-based meat, but I guess more of a fungus-based meat. As you'll hear, the idea for the company came to Kim while in a college course. 3 years later, she's now raised millions of dollars, is operating a 12,000 square foot production facility in Northern California, and has already released a flagship product, Koji Bacon. Yes, bacon made from the fungus koji, which I can personally attest tastes quite good. So enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with an entrepreneur who's betting that the next big thing in plant-based meat isn't going to be plants at all. If Kim has her way, just maybe the next big trend among advocates for local artisanal protein won't be farm to table, but rather will be fermenter to table, with Prime Roots brewing the way forward. I now give you Prime Roots CEO, Kimberlie Lee.
Kim Lee, welcome to the Business for Good podcast.
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me.
Awesome to be with you. You know, I really regret that we are not in person because of the pandemic, because when we were originally planning on releasing this episode, we were going to do a cool tour of the Prime Roots office. We were going to do some product tastings. It was going to be really cool, but never one to throw in the towel, even though we kept having to delay and delay and delay. You instead just shipped me some really awesome Prime Roots products for me to try on my own because I could not make it to Berkeley to hang out with you. So thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I cannot believe we tried to schedule this in March and it is now August, nearing September, and we're here now. So
Yeah, the world throws you some funny curveballs, that's for sure. But I will tell you, one thing the world did throw me was some delicious prime roots bacon and other products, which really were fantastic. My friends and colleagues and I all tried them at the Better Meat Co. and really enjoyed them. And as you know, and as I've seen it on Prime Roots social media, even my dog Eddie got to try some Prime Roots bacon, and he actually, surprisingly, is a pretty finicky eater, and he loved it. So you get two paws up from Eddie.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, my dog is also really picky, just in general with food, and he loves our bacon. He'll only have it crispy. I'm also a crispy bacon person, so I think he got it from me.
Yep, the apple did not fall far from the tree, or rather, the bacon did not fall far from the
The dog.
dog. But yeah, as you know, I actually did give him some crispy bacon, but by the time I sent you that video, I was too lazy to cook it, so I just took it out of the package and gave him like the uncooked bacon. And I presume that your products are not approved, or maybe they are. Are they approved for use in pet food?
I don't know if they are. We're not a pet food company, so I haven't really looked into that.
Well, there's a group called AFCO that regulates all the ingredients that can go into pet food, and it is a pretty stringent thing. It's way more stringent than for human food, actually, because they presume the dog may only eat that food, so they want to make sure it's all the dog foods are nutritionally complete. But I'm pretty sure that Aspergillus is actually approved by AFCO. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm pretty sure that there is some koji in some pet foods, actually.
Yeah,
So
could very well be.
well, I really love the product, but for people who don't even know what Aspergillus is, we're going to get to that. Don't worry. But first, I just want to get into how this all started, Kim, because how old are you now?
I'm 25.
So you're 25. You've been running this company for the last 3 years. You've raised millions of dollars in venture capital funding. I would imagine that many people looking at you would think, I'm older than her, yet look at what she's doing. Why have I not done this? Maybe they're thinking that. So tell me, how did it start for you, Kim? What was the idea for this company, and where were you when you wanted to start it?
So I'm not much of like a Steve Jobs fan, but something that he said that I listened to recently really resonated with me. He says, you can't connect the dots looking forwards, you can only connect them looking backwards. And so my journey really starts from when I was a child. My mom is a professional chef, and so I grew up in her kitchens, just really loving food. I definitely consider myself a foodie. I love food, have worked in the industry from the time I was 11, 12, like managing the back end of my parents' businesses, and then really progressed into restaurant management. I know the ins and outs of hospitality and restaurants and food. And so by the time I went off to college, I had a solid like 6 years of full time experience in the food industry, like saw the ins, the outs, the good and the bad. Something that never really struck me until recently was how I had been serving people millions and millions of meals, and I just loved being able to really see people being excited and really bonding over food. um, it didn't really connect to me that like the food that we were serving, although it was delicious, was also hurting our planet. And it's because like even if you're involved in making food, you are so disconnected because of how big food is and how broken our food system is. And so when I learned that over 15% or around 15% of greenhouse gas emissions are caused by um, animal agriculture, like meat, that really struck a chord with me. And like it's more than all of transportation, consumer and commercial combined. Like I, as someone who's an environmentalist, couldn't reconcile that. So obviously as a foodie, it's hard because I grew up eating meat. Went to the grocery store, looked at all of the meat options that were alternative meat options that were available, and I love tofu, but I can only eat so much tofu. So I looked for the alternatives. They're all soy based, wheat based, really processed food, like really processed ingredients. The taste wasn't there. They're very mushy. This was definitely before Beyond and Impossible had really stepped up and made products that were made really, really for meat eaters. And so I really took it upon myself to find a better solution of making better meat products that tasted like meat, looked like meat, and also had a nutritional profile that would be amenable to people looking for more of a whole food, more of a natural foods diet. Um, I think that processed foods, the verdict is out about whether they're good or bad, and there's a lot of nutrition research going into it. But I think that objectively, less processed foods are generally better for you because like they're more unadulterated. And so that's what we set out to do. Is really make these whole food protein meat alternatives, starting with texture, taste, nutrition, just really no compromises. And you mentioned Aspergillus earlier. We use koji, which is the colloquial name for it. And the koji is a beloved Japanese superfood. Michelin star chefs love it. And we actually found that it has the natural texture of meat. So we grow it and we turn it into our meat and seafood alternatives that are no compromises.
Well, let's talk about that, Kim. So you went to UC Berkeley, right? And
I did.
You took this class. So what's your major in?
I did a lot of things at Berkeley. One of the things that I was really interested in was the intersection of microbiology, which is what I did a lot of research in, and food systems and food science. And so I took all of the toolkits of skills and things I learned in all of my classes, put it together, and really just that was the genesis of Prime Roots. I was actually starting my PhD research in agricultural microbiology, and kind of went sideways and said, "Hey, like I can use my skills for something way more impactful today, rather than sitting in a lab or doing research for another like 5-10 years."
So you're in this alternative proteins class at UC Berkeley, as the story goes. Is that where you have the idea to explore koji as an alternative to meat, or had you already been thinking about that even before taking this class with Professor Ricardo San Martin?
The class was a really important part of exposing me to the problems of animal agriculture, and then within that context, being really incubated and like being also working in a lab at a time really was where the idea was born that we could use fungi, use koji to make better meat products. And it everybody else in the lab, it was the first year the lab was being run. Everyone was looking at plant-based or cell-based, and we thought there was something interesting in the middle.
Mm-hmm. And so had you, I mean, I presume you had heard of koji before, but had you thought about its use as a potential meat alternative prior to the class?
Nope, I didn't even think very much about meat alternatives because I didn't understand the problem. I was a lover of the environment. I was studying, one of the things I was studying was environmental science, and I just really like we had in school. You learn a lot about the problems, and especially going to Berkeley, you can feel you're really down about how like the world is burning around you. There's so many problems, and I realized that the professors weren't going to tell me how to fix things, as if they knew the solutions, or if there were solutions, they'd probably be doing it. And so I think just a combination of being like really depressed about the state of the world and the environment, learning about how big animal agriculture was on that problem. And then obviously the logical next step is say, oh, let's make meat better.
Mm-hmm.
And then just having that technical background was like the, I guess, the perfect breeding grounds for, the idea of using koji for meat.
Nice. So you mentioned, Kim, if you think about plant-based meats today, most of the time they're coming from wheat, pea, or soy, or some combination thereof. You're talking about not using plants at all. You're talking about going not just to fungi, and most people think of fungi, they think of mushrooms, but you're not even talking about mushrooms. So tell us what it is that you are making alternative meats out of, and why are they better than making it out of plants?
So we use koji, which is a fungi, and koji is actually not foreign to most people. It's an ingredient that's found in miso, in sake, and soy sauce. So what happens in, for example, the miso making process is you take soybeans and you'll add koji, and the koji is actually what ferments the soybeans and makes it into an umami-rich paste that we know and love. So instead of using soy and soy being the feedstock for the koji, we actually grow the koji separately by itself in a liquid nutrient broth, basically, so it can grow And so we harness the power of koji by itself. And if you're trying to visualize it, it looks like chicken breast fibers, where there's long white fibers that you can then use as the base for any type of meat and any type of seafood alternative.
So when you think about that type of what's typically referred to as a mycoprotein or a protein from the fungal kingdom, to my knowledge, the only product that is on the market is corn. That's QUORN, which is made from a different species of fungus than what you are using. Are you a fan of their products, and has their success been an inspiration for you?
It's funny you bring up corn because I had the idea separately about knowing about corn.
Wow.
And so I thought, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Why has no one done this? And if you do more research, their products mostly are vegetarian, not vegan, because they use egg whites. So it didn't really come up for a while, but I kept searching and I found out about corn. I actually drove 3 hours to get their turkey roast, um, which I absolutely love. Because you can like see the texture and you can see like how fungi is a much better base for meat alternatives because you're eating the whole protein, you're eating the whole food, you're not disrupting any of the cells, doing any extrusion or isolation, which most plant-based alternatives use. And so corn is definitely an inspiration to what we do. I think we do it slightly better because we use cleaner ingredients, and koji is has been eaten and consumed for over 8,000 years in the human diet. So it's very much known quantity as to its health benefits and also its properties.
Well, let me ask you about that, Kim. And I've been wondering about this. So I ate your products, several of them. I loved them. I felt great. No problems. Don't worry about that. But I do want to ask you. So this is something that has been consumed for a long time, as you mentioned, by humans. But my presumption is that it's in pretty small quantities. Like if you consume soy sauce or sake, like the amount of koji in there, my guess is pretty small. What you're doing, though, is making koji the primary ingredient. So let's say there was somebody who, like to play devil's advocate, was saying, hey, salt has been consumed by humans in small quantities for a long time, but it doesn't mean that you want to eat, a brick of salt. Because that actually and that dosage wouldn't be good for you. Have you ever done anything, whether looking at studies on this, to eating such large amounts of koji comparatively to what people have eaten in the past?
Yeah, that's definitely something I thought about very early on, and it's funny because we've done a lot of sake drinking as kind of research,
Of course,
and
pure R&D, of
Nigori,
course.
exactly. Nigori sakes actually have a fair amount of koji in it, and because it's unfiltered. And then the other thing is if you look at tempeh. Tempeh is soybeans inoculated with the fungi, and then it forms this like really beautiful cake. And it's all the white bits in tempeh. Some have more, some have less. That's all fungi. So there's a really similar, I guess, consumption level within tempeh as there are within our products. Ours probably has a little bit more, but tempeh and oncom and a lot of other traditionally fermented foods in Southeast Asia have high amounts of fungi.
Cool. Well, I ate it and loved it, and I can assure you, Eddie appeared to feel good as well. So at least you have a sample size of a couple folks here
What was
who
your
enjoyed it.
favorite? Oh, sorry. What was your favorite?
The chicken. Yeah, I liked the bacon. I thought it was good, but I thought, was it a Kung Pao chicken? I forget what the flavoring was, but it was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I also love the chicken. It's one of my favorites. And the texture of koji lends itself so well to making any type of breast chicken or chicken products.
Yeah, well, I hope you'll do more of that. I know bacon has been very popular for you, but I hope you'll do more of it because I think that chickens get the short end of the stick in life quite a lot. So I'm hoping that we'll see some more chicken products. But I thought it was delicious, and I really enjoyed it. But let's go back to before the chicken. Let's go back to before the bacon, because my recollection is that when we first met, which was probably like a few years ago to my recollection, that you were actually focused on salmon and that you were making salmon burgers. So why was that the first thing that you wanted to do, and what led to the pivot away from doing salmon?
Yeah, that was a long time ago. We started life, the company was called Terramino Foods. We focused on seafood and specifically salmon burger, because we really wanted to prove our ability to grow koji and use it in a product. And we wanted to choose a hard product. I guess we're kind of a startup that takes the hard route at every single turn. Not because I think it's because it yields great dividends in the long term, and also it's kind of fun to do hard things. And so we wanted to start with seafood because it's pretty hard from a flavor perspective and a texture perspective. So we wanted to start there, really to prove the capabilities. And we actually were really successful in being able to create salmon. And then we went on to validating tuna and a few other seafood products. The pivot away from seafood really was dictated by our community. We know that seafood is in the cards for us into the future. It's really important. Seafood makes up about 40% of global protein consumption, but it's less than 1% of the alternatives. And so there's a huge space for seafood. The problem with seafood, I think, today is that, especially in the U.S., it's consumers aren't there yet in terms of their adoption of seafood, let alone their adoption of alternative seafoods. So the space is continually growing, and I see there being a lot of room in the future. Back to the community piece, we had I guess we can make so many different things, and we had proved our capabilities as a platform, the Koji platform, to make everything ranging from chicken all the way to, obviously our salmon burger. We are kind of paralyzed as to what to do next. So we said, hey, we're building a food company from the bottoms up. And the interesting thing that we can do here is why don't we actually ask consumers, ask people what they want us to make? And it's very unorthodox. The food industry usually works there's somebody at the top who makes the decisions, usually a white male who is not indicative of who the consumer is, which is 80 to 90% females are making the food purchasing decisions. And they're not making food for people, they're making food for personas, what they think people want. And so we said, hey, let's do this crazy thing. Let's just see if people will tell us what they want. And to our surprise, we got tens of thousands of people to give us input on what products they wanted to see. It took a long time to go through everything, but from that, we actually saw that people wanted a bacon alternative, which is why bacon right now is our main product. So we're really going where people want us to go, where our consumer wants us to go. And we're building a food company of the future alongside consumers, alongside our community, where they are the center of our world, instead of saying, the product or the platform is. So we make everything. We can make everything. We're being really focused on the key things that our consumer and our community wants at first.
Sure. That's very cool. So when you started the company, though, so when you were Terramino Foods, you were still a student. And my recollection of things is that you actually got some startup funding from Peter Thiel. Is that right?
So the company did not directly get investment from Peter. I'm a Thiel fellow, so I had already, stopped out of school, stopped out of my program, and had gone full time into Terramino at the time, now Prime Roots. So I personally have support from the Thiel Fellows and the Thiel Fellowship Network. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely been a great experience.
Okay, and then you went into an actual incubator program through IndieBio, right?
Yes. The timing is we went through IndieBio right after Berkeley, and then kind of after IndieBio, I was connected with the Thiel Fellowship, and then at that point we had also gotten our seed funding, so about 2 years ago.
Okay, and how much money has the company raised to date, and how many folks are working there now?
So publicly, we've raised a little over $4 million. And we are a team of around 15. We're growing every week, and we're always looking for really mission-driven individuals. We have a lot of open positions at the moment since we're going through a little growth spurt. So just a plug if anyone's looking to join a mission-driven, high-energy team. We have positions open from everything from finance, operations, product development, you name it. There's definitely a lot of room.
That's great. Well, we can definitely include in the show notes, Kim, to, I presume you have a website where it indicates what open positions Prime Roots has right now, right?
Yes, it's all on our website, and you can see the positions. And I mean, you probably do this too, Paul. At a startup, not everyone fits into a certain position. So if there's not a position that really really drives home what you are and who you are, feel free to reach out to us too. We make positions all the time.
Yeah, I always say that it seems like far preferable to try to fit a job description to a person rather than a person to a job description. That you're going to have a lot more success doing one rather than the other.
Yeah, I've always thought that too.
So there's a lot of companies trying to do mycelium meat alternatives right now. It seems like there's this explosion, whether, Wild Earth is using koji in their dog food. You've got Nature's Find raising a lot of money to make mycelium meat alternatives, and Meaty, or I think they used to be called Emergy Labs, doing some the mycelium-based steaks as well. Where do you think that you stand in comparison to them, and how do you think that your products differ from what they're doing?
I think it's a great thing that there's more mycelium fungi-based companies in the space. Just as there are many plant-based companies, I think there needs to exist many different fungi companies. I don't see them. I think that they are competitors in one sense, but more than anything, I think, looking at Impossible, Beyond, all of these companies you mentioned, like we're all working together in a collective goal of expanding the size of the alternative meat market. Today, we are, I think, probably like 1, at most 2% of the total protein market. And there's so much room for growth. And so it's great that we're all working on different applications of our fungi, because these all need to exist in tandem for there to be more choices for the consumer. Like if you look at plant-based dairies, they're at 15% of the total dairy market. We have a long way to go. And personally, I would love for there to be a plant-based version of every single product at the grocery store. I think that would make me so happy, because I'm actually a flexitarian. I'm not fully plant-based or vegan. And so if there was an option for every single product I consumed, I would very easily be plant-based.
Well, so I definitely, I purposely avoided using the C word competitors, because I agree. I'm not so sure that, just because Wild Earth also uses koji, obviously they're not a competitor of Prime Roots. And I'm not saying I think that Nature's Find or others are either, but it is interesting because, you've got, in the plant-based space, you have one company, Impossible, using soy, whereas Beyond is using pea, whereas Prime Roots is using Aspergillus, and presumably Nature's Find might be using some other different fungal strains. So it's interesting because in the same way there is a dramatic variety of plants from which you can make plant-based meats, there are really a huge different number of fungal species from which you can make mycelium-based meat. And so I do think that there will be an interesting race to see who can basically say, like, we've got the coolest or the best or the cheapest product, or something like that. And to further emphasize what you're saying, Kim, look, there's room in the world for both McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's. There's room in the world for Impossible and Beyond. Surely there is room for, a few different companies that are exploring the fungal kingdom to make alternative meats. So I totally agree with you on that. And if it can be done more efficiently, if that's possible, then it would be a particularly great advancement. So I want to ask you about that. Like right now, plant-based meat is typically sold at multiples over the cost of conventional meat. It's not that it's sold at like 30 or 40% more. It's generally, 300 or 400% over the cost of commodity meat. And this is one of the things that I think is holding the space back in terms of greater adoption. You mentioned a moment ago that plant-based meat is still a very minuscule portion of the total meat market. And Christy Legawi, who's the founder and CEO of Rebellious Foods, she did a really interesting analysis and looked at it not just from a dollar portion, like what's the dollar value of plant-based meat versus animal meat, but the actual number of pounds, which from a sustainability perspective is far more important because you want to displace as much animal-based meat as possible, not just the dollars. And what she found was that about 0.2% of the pounds of meat produced in America last year were plant-based, and 99.8% of the pounds were animal-based. So it's a huge, huge room for growth area when you still are only at 0.2%. And her theory is, which I agree with, is that if the price can come down, you're going to see far greater adoption. So how do you see the price coming down? Because obviously your products are marketed right now above the cost of, let's say, conventional bacon. But how do you see yourself bending that cost curve? And what are the avenues that you want to take to try to get there?
So on a efficiency perspective, we are by far the most efficient way of making protein that is that has the ability to replace animal agriculture. We can be priced at scale lower than the cost of factory farm chicken, which is the lowest price meat. I think it's also decently unfair because there's a lot of subsidies and the farm bill diverts a lot of money that supports directly animal agriculture. And if anyone's listening here doesn't know what the farm bill is, I highly recommend you going to look it up. It is one of the most effed up things in our food system, and I think it's holding us back just in terms of creating a healthy food system because it subsidizes really unhealthy foods. And so I think that while subsidized meat is very unfair, it's very inefficient. And so we're feeding on average, 30 pounds of feed to get 1 pound of output from an animal because the animal has to eat food and expend energy. Whereas our fungi, they can actually make their own protein. And so the koji takes basic nutrients, carbon, nitrogen, and it can actually synthesize its own amino acids in protein, which is really unique. And so what that enables us to do is create the most efficient from a biological perspective meat alternative, which at scale means that we will be able to compete with factory farm chicken. And so that's many years down the road, but we're working towards that.
Cool. Well, Corn is very open about their processes. They talk about how they're, the primary thing that they're feeding their fungi is, I believe, glucose. Are you open about what you feed to your little koji spores in your broth there, or no?
Yeah, it's similar. Although I can't say exactly what it is because it's always evolving at the moment. We're optimizing the feed stuff. We actually also are experimenting with a lot of different ways of recovering very high nutrition, high energy feedstocks. So, for example, I don't want to call it runoff. It's just like a side stream or a waste stream of like a tofu manufacturer or like a tortilla maker. It's very starchy water that is outputted from those systems that goes into our drains, and that's just wasted energy that we can actually reclaim and use to grow the fungi. So we're experimenting with a lot of different ways of growing the koji.
Cool.
So today I don't know exactly what it is. I mean, I would tell everyone if I knew. We are very open about how the koji is grown, and it's very similar to how you brew beer, how you ferment alcoholic beverages.
Yeah, that's really cool. I was listening to an interview actually on Adam Yee's podcast. It's called My Food Job Rocks. And he was interviewing the founder and CEO of Hodo Soy, the folks who have really made tofu far more popular than it once was. And he was talking about the same thing that you are, Kim, about how they had this co-product, essentially, like the okara that they just weren't using at all. And they have found ways to repurpose it and make other products or sell it to other folks rather than, I think you mentioned like they were just like using it for like cattle feed or something like that. But that they have found it to be actually quite a good co-product as well.
Yeah, I think there's so many interesting ways of making our food system more efficient. But I think like the big elephant cow in the room is really tackling how we make protein more efficient.
Yeah, for sure. So let me ask you about that. So if you're constantly optimizing your process and your formulations and so on, have you filed for patents yet on your technology, or is this still in the realm of trade secrets?
The food industry, it's really trade secrets are king. We do have patents that we filed on our process, so protected from multiple avenues there. Yeah, it's definitely a very complicated web of how do you protect your developments, and we've been working on the technology for over 3.5 years, so it's
Mhm.
definitely evolved a lot.
Sure. Yeah, I can imagine. I read, Kim, speaking of evolving, so you all have moved from a small facility to a 12,000 foot facility, square foot facility that is in Oakland. Is that right?
We're in Berkeley.
In Berkeley,
We're
excuse me. Thank you.
very close to Oakland, but we're
thank,
in Berkeley.
thank you for putting it so diplomatically. But yes, in Berkeley, thank you. So that's of course a pretty large facility for such a young company. So sadly, because I couldn't come there despite your generous offer to offer a tour, walk me through the facility now and walk us through like what will we see if we go into this 12,000 square foot facility.
So we have our whole HQ is in this facility, and so we have all of our R&D. We have all of our office space. Everything is in one in under one roof. We have the full building to ourselves, which is really nice. And we have two kitchens essentially that we produce all the food out of. And so you can imagine walking into a commissary kitchen or a commercial kitchen. We have similar equipment even, and we do all of our production in there. We have R&D that's right outside the door. So it's actually really nice to be able to take a product from an ideation phase and just a prototyping phase right into our essentially our pilot plant to scale that up. And so it's a very ad hoc type of environment because we when we got into the space it was a pretty much just a warehouse, and we were thinking about putting walls up and making like new rooms and stuff, and all we did now is we've put together a bunch of racks and like we've made like pseudo walls, and so it's very much what you would expect from a growing food startup. It's not super polished, but it is nice.
That's cool. Well, I really hope to be able to be there sometime. It would be a lot of fun. So, pandemic willing, we will make it happen. What kind of volumes can you produce there? So, I mean, it seems like a pretty big space. Maybe you don't have as many walls as you might like, but I presume that you can put out. I mean, the products you sent, they look. I mean, first of all, they tasted good, but they looked extremely professional, well designed, well packaged. All of that, I presume, is happening within the walls of this facility that you're in. So, like, how much of it can you produce?
Thanks, Paul, for the compliments. We can, so we're in the process right now of scaling up. And so once we scale up, we'll be able to produce tens of thousands of pounds from our facility, which will be super exciting because we'll be able to really push forwards our mission of being able to truly nourish people on planet.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kim. When you say tens of thousands of pounds, that's a month, a year, a week. Like what time frame are we talking about?
Uh, Tens of thousands of pounds a month.
Cool. Oh, that's a lot of bacon. One strip doesn't weigh that much, so that's really great. Good for you.
It's a lot of bacon.
And people say you don't want to see how the bacon is made. I presume in your case that you'll be quite eager for people to see how it's made.
We're very excited to bring our community and bring people into the fold of how alternative meat products and how this new wave of meat can be and protein can be made. I think one of the largest criticisms of plant-based meats is how ultra processed a lot of them are, and there's a lot of satire and comedy now about how it's kind of like it goes into this black box and it comes out as a burger. We really want to demystify that. And so as we're scaling, as the pandemic goes away, we're really excited to be able to host tours. We have an announcement in the works about an offshoot type facility that we have that will be able to really like show people what we do and get them to interact with us directly. So I'm excited to announce that hopefully like in the new year, hopefully the pandemic will be better too.
Very nice. That's cool. So people could see, for example, the brewery, so to speak, and watch how the koji gets made.
And also get to experience the products, which I think is super important.
That's great. That's really cool. Oh, good for you. Will that be in Berkeley as well?
In the Bay Area.
Okay.
And yeah, we're just super excited to have an open public space for people to come and hang out with us.
Nice.
Very hard given the pandemic. We actually were hoping to do it this year, but it's funny, we signed the lease 1 week before shelter in place started.
Well, I can assure you that many things at the Better Meat Co. have been delayed because of the pandemic as well, which is a real travesty. But I hear what you're saying on that for sure, and it's definitely something that makes it a tougher environment for everybody. Kim, I want to ask you about this with regard to the protein content, because the protein was very high in the products that you at least sent me. And, a lot of the times plant-based meats get high protein because, as you mentioned, they're using isolates or fractionates. So they're using plant proteins or plant products that have been basically fractionated in order to boost the total protein in the food because you're discarding some of the other ingredients in there. You're doing a whole food product and it still has a lot of protein. And you've mentioned in other interviews that you can tweak the amount of protein that gets produced by the koji. So tell us, how do you tweak that, and why do you have such high protein even without isolation or fractionation?
So in terms of the technology, the majority of the work that we do, the hard work is really done by the koji. So in terms of tweaking the protein content in the end product, we can actually make meat technically with 4 times as much protein as actual meat. It wouldn't taste, right though, because meat is a combination of fat and protein and other ingredients. But the koji, as its whole food, as the whole fiber, it has upwards of 80% protein, and that comes partially naturally from its biology, its ability to do that. Because you can't coax a plant to have 80% protein, but we can get the koji to produce more protein. But and when we're looking at the end product, it's much easier for us to make a product that has higher protein than the actual meat itself.
Well, that's really cool. So when you say you can do that, is that based on, what you feed the koji? Like in the same way, if you're thinking about raising animals, you can affect what the animal's nutrition of their meat or their milk or their eggs is based on what you feed them. And I presume that's what you're saying here as well.
As a combination of what you feed it, how you grow it, how you treat the koji. I'm trying to. They're not sentient. It kind of seems like they are. They definitely have personalities. Being a fungi whisperer, we've definitely learned a lot about how to grow fungi. A lot of my friends call me like the mushroom person. I don't grow mushrooms, but I do know a thing or two about fungi.
Do you believe that music will alter their rate of growth or make them any quote unquote happier or less happy?
I should try that.
I only ask. I was debating this with a friend of mine, I don't know, several months ago, who was arguing that he believed that in the same way that, for example, dairy cows will produce more milk when they listen to certain kinds of music compared to other kinds of music, that he thought that microbes might also react differently to different types of music. And I asked him to send me any actually like peer-reviewed published literature on the topic showing this, which I have yet to receive. So we'll have to wait and see. But if I find any, I'll certainly be letting you know first, Kim.
Okay, well, I guess we have a new set of experiments to run then.
Yeah, actually, interestingly, that's why Perfect Day, they were an earlier episode on the Business for Good podcast, but they changed their name from Move Free to Perfect Day because of the Lou Reed song, Perfect Day, which there was a study showing that cows produced more milk when they were listening to that particular song. I don't know how reproducible that result is. If it was just like a one-off, I don't know, but that's why they changed their name to Perfect Day. So maybe you went from Terramino to Prime Roots. Maybe there'll be some song that you find works really well, and then the next thing you know, it will be called, Pour Some Sugar on Me from Def Leppard, because they would probably like having sugar poured on them.
That's really funny.
I don't know why that song just popped in my mind. I haven't even listened to it in a long time, but for whatever reason, that song came into my mind, and I thought, they like sugar. They would like it poured on them. Anyway, so there is a lot that would be great to talk about, but in the interest of time, I just want to ask you, you mentioned at the beginning that you're 25, so I presume you were 22 when you started this company. A lot's happened in that time. Your life is a lot different now that you've raised millions of dollars and you're the CEO overseeing a lot of people, presumably who are, many of them are older than you and have more experience than you do in certain fields. So how do you manage it? Like, as a 25-year-old CEO of a company that's raised millions of dollars, do you think that there's any particular extra scrutiny that is placed on you? How do you manage doing that?
I think not so much of my age. I have, I guess, additional scrutiny. The Valley is a place where there are a lot of young entrepreneurs, so it's not atypical. I think that being a female entrepreneur definitely has its challenges.
Mm-hmm.
For example, there are many studies that show that when you're talking to funders, so like venture capitalists, they'll ask you different questions being a female founder versus being a male founder. And so it's really interesting, I think, kind of being a person of color, being female, and also being young. I think all of those things definitely make it, I would think, make it harder, but I don't have the experience of not being a young female person of color founder. But I think that even with any adversity, it's really important just to believe in yourself, believe in your mission, and do your best at selling your dream. And so, if anyone out there is, in my situation or in a situation where you feel that there's a lot of forces working against you, I can tell you that the best thing to do is be optimistic and keep trying.
Well, that's really great advice, Kim. And it's reminiscent actually of a book I recently read called The Choice by Edith Eger. And she talks about, it's a very best-selling book, but I was really moved by it. And, she was imprisoned in Auschwitz during World War II, and then has faced enormous adversity, both prior to that, during that, and after that. And she moved to the US and got a PhD in psychology, and now treats soldiers. Even she's in her 90s and she still treats soldiers who have PTSD. And she makes the point that whatever adversity you're facing, that only you can embrace a victim's mentality. And, nobody's endured something worse than her. I mean, she goes into these truly horrific stories about her time in Auschwitz. And she talks about the importance of resilience and choosing just to keep moving forward, whatever adversity you face in your life. She makes this point that you can choose to let it keep you down, or you can choose just to keep on moving forward with your life. And I was particularly moved by it. And I think it's a good message for all of us, no matter what type of adversity we might be facing. So I appreciate your insights on that.
That's really profound. And I think that for me, like a huge shift in mindset that has really helped me in my journey is really embracing failure. Or like the concept of failure. I never think of myself as failing anymore because I see failure and things that go sideways or downwards as learning opportunities. You learn, hopefully you're not making the same mistake or failure twice. But really embracing the journey and embracing failure, I think, is a really important part. And the original question was about being young. I think youthfulness is actually one of my superpowers.
Nice.
I think that being young, and actually part of why I think Peter Thiel and a lot of his writings, and what he said publicly, he looks at young founders because they have the ability to see white spaces better than a potentially very seasoned entrepreneur, like older person starting a company that maybe has 20, 30 years in corporate America. And so it's really interesting because you can actually embrace being young and like see it as a superpower, rather than being like, oh, I'm young and inexperienced, which I know a lot of, I talk to a lot of friends all the time, who are like, yeah, like I want to start a company, but I feel like I need a PhD or I need this, I need that. You don't need any of that. You just have to like have the passion, have the drive, and you can surround yourself with people who are smarter than you and who can help you learn and grow.
I love that, Kim. I really love that. It resonates so much with this core belief that I have as well, which is that, sure, academic credentials can be quite useful and important, no doubt about it, but they're not necessary. There's so often people ask me, oh, I want to do something good in the world. Like, and so what should I study in school? Thinking, what? Like, what do you like? What are you good at doing? Let's do that. How about that? Like, you mentioned earlier, think about all the needs that you have. Like somebody might think, oh, well, I'm not a microbiologist. Why would Kim want to hire me? Well, you also need accountants and HR people and graphic designers and, like all these things that somebody might be good at. And they're thinking that they have to go get a PhD in microbiology. Now, of course, if they have a PhD in microbiology, I'm sure you'd be happy to talk with them too. But, you just, there's so many ways to be useful in the world for sure. So let me ask you, Kim, then, you're talking about experience and knowledge. Like if you could go back 3 years and knowing what you now know, you've been on this roller coaster ride of starting this company and growing it. If you could talk to the 22-year-old Kim and offer any advice from the 25-year-old Kim, now that you know what you know, what do you think would be the most important lesson that you might offer to your younger self?
I would say to 22-year-old Kim, trust your gut, and trust your instinct. I think the biggest learning experiences, that's what I call failures.
Mhm.
Now, the biggest times that we have, experienced any type of, things going sideways, things not going the way we wanted to them go, was really times, most of the time, when I haven't trusted my gut. And I have either deferred to someone more experienced, or have, succumbed to some external pressures. And when I think that trusting your gut as an entrepreneur is by far one of the most important things you should do and can do, that takes a lot of training. You can't trust yourself 100% of the time, but you also have to know when to and when not to trust yourself. And that is a huge learning curve.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Well, I hear you on that. So let me just ask you then, if you think about the journey that you've been on, Kim, have there been any resources for you that you have found quite useful, whether it be books or speeches or anything that you think has been useful in your journey as an entrepreneur that you would recommend to other people who want to try to emulate some of the some of the success that you're now having?
Yes, this is going to sound really weird, but google.com and youtube.com are
I've heard of them.
they are treasure troves of whatever knowledge and whatever you're seeking to do. I've learned so much from Google and so much from YouTube. A lot of the time when people come to me and asking, for questions, or like how to troubleshoot something or about how something works, like I will go. The first thing I'll do is probably Google something, and like Google as a skill is actually something you should develop, because it's actually hard to be a good Googler. But that is where I start with most things when I'm like puzzled about something or want to learn about something new. I always start there. Um, the internet is such an amazing place. I actually grew up without. I'm young, but I actually know a life without the internet. And I also have a deep appreciation for books. I think Medium articles are great, and like getting advice and getting and learning things from the internet is great. But it is hard to have that long form storytelling that happens in books. And so um, I buy a lot of books. I don't actually get time to read all of them, but there's a study that says that hoarding books apparently is also an indicator of success or something like that. So um, YouTube,
So
Google.
funded by like the American Library Association, I'm sure.
Yeah, I definitely don't have like go to dashboards or go to places that are like resources. I start with Google and I start with YouTube, and it is crazy how much you can learn.
Okay. Um, Interestingly, my wife Tony had a desire to revamp a bathroom in our house, and she certainly had no knowledge of how to possibly do this. But she ended up getting pretty far into the process just through watching YouTube videos and going to get the supplies that she needed. So I was very impressed that she could. It's not yet done, which is why I say that she's gotten a lot through the process. But YouTube has really done a lot for her in that respect. So
Yep.
good for her. um, Finally, Kim, as an entrepreneur, you have this really cool idea of using fungal proteins in order to mimic meat. But I'm sure that you've thought about other ideas for helping to solve serious social problems as well. So, presuming that you have thought of other ideas that maybe you're not going to pursue because you are busy doing prime roots, are there any other ideas that you would think, hey, if a listener of this show were to go out and start this company, I think it would be really awesome?
Oh my gosh. I have a spreadsheet, which is a decision matrix of like 200 different companies that I would love to start if I had the time. And I've actually like ranked them based on everything from passion, impact, feasibility, money needed. And so it's a pretty elaborate spreadsheet. So if anybody wants ideas, hit me up. But the things that are definitely like top of mind for me are women's health, which is severely underfunded, considering women are 50% of the population, and there's so many things that affect women that are just neglected. And then the second thing is agriculture, which I think I'll get back to after prime roots or with prime roots. As I mentioned earlier, I was going to be starting PhD research in agricultural microbiology. Agriculture is very broken. Monoculture, monocropping is definitely not a sustainable way of producing food. And that was the research that I really wanted to look into. I think there's huge opportunity to tackle that. For me, it was, saying, oh, wait, like all the plants that I want to make better grow better, like they're getting fed to animals. So if we reduce the burden of having to grow all of these plants and feeding them to animals, which is really inefficient, I can make way more impact today, which is why we're starting with tackling the protein problem. But agriculture is huge and very broken.
For sure. And I really can't tell you how much I admire, Kim, that you have this spreadsheet with a matrix of all of the pros and cons and ways to factor in what you might want to do with your life. So that is perhaps the greatest window into your personality that might suggest why you've gotten this far, actually. So I'm extremely impressed by that. My hat is off to you for everything that you've accomplished. And one quick comment, and I've mentioned this on the show before, but we'll only mention it again, in that if you think about women's health, there are at least 300 million women in the developing world today who want to have fewer children than they're having, and they don't have access to contraceptives for a variety of reasons. Whether it's that they live in patriarchal societies where where they're not allowed to make that choice, they can't afford them, they don't have access, there's social taboos against using them, whatever it is, there are big barriers to them controlling their family size. And we know that smaller family sizes lead to the fastest pathway out of poverty, that you can have more education for the children who are brought into the world. It's important for a whole variety of reasons for women's empowerment to enable and empower women to control their family sizes. And I've often wondered why there isn't more on this, like to offer contraceptives that might be not necessarily permanent, but can last for several years. And that could be, something that could be really cheaply manufactured and distributed in a way. And so for anybody out there thinking about what they might be able to do for women's health, that may be an idea worth pursuing for you out there. Do you have any thoughts on that, Kim?
No, I think that's a really, really valid point. And women today don't have full control of their bodies. And that is something that I think really needs to change.
Well, yeah, for sure. Yeah, just think about how easy it is for a man to get a vasectomy, for example, um, and then wonder, like, and other things too. But anyway, it's another issue about which I've been passionate for years. There is a nonprofit organization called Pathfinder that I donate to that is trying to help solve this problem. But I've always thought there must be some for-profit business solutions to help speed things along here. So I'll include a link in the show notes to Pathfinder for this episode. And I want to reiterate, Kim, my gratitude to you for everything that you are doing and the pioneering work that you're doing to try to bring a new generation of not plant-based, but certainly animal-free alternatives to the conventional meat industry. It's really important, and I can assure you that I am rooting very hard for your success.
Thank you, Paul. Also, rooting for your success, and the work that you do at Better Meat Co. is really, really important to reducing our animal reliance in our food system. I think all of these approaches, cell-based, animal-based, blended, all need to exist in tandem.
Yes, I think it's kind of like fossil fuels in that if you think about how urgent and severe the problem of fossil fuel usage is, you don't want just one alternative. You don't want solar or just wind or just geothermal. You want a variety of alternatives. And the same is so in conventional meat. You want a number of alternatives, whether it's microbial protein, cultivated meat, plant-based meat, hybridized meat, et cetera. You need lots of ways of trying to solve this problem. So I'm in agreement. And I'll tell you, Kim, if you ever did think about starting any of these other companies, you wouldn't be the only CEO to run some pretty cool companies. I know Elon Musk runs SpaceX and Tesla and the Boring Company and
Solar City.
Thank you. So I was trying to think, Solar, what is it? Yeah, Solar City. So, if he can be the CEO of 4 major companies, I think Kimberlie Lee can do the same. So I'll look forward to chatting with you on a subsequent episode of Business for Good about whatever company you're doing in tandem with, not after, but in tandem with Prime Roots.
I love that. Yeah, I think our aspirations for Prime Roots is to really build a food company of the future. And food is so fascinating because the longest lived institutions in the world are religions, alcohol companies, and food companies. And so I'm excited to scale Prime Roots to being, really a food company of the future. And then hopefully I can have a little side hustle, starting an equally large company in agriculture, women's health, or any of the other things that are interesting to me.
Very cool. And one interesting thing to think about, what are the oldest institutions in human civilization? Well, for another episode. But Kimberlie Lee, CEO of Prime Roots, thanks so much for joining us on Business for Good. And we'll look forward to following all of your exploits, and we'll look forward to getting more and more of these products of yours out into the market so a greater number of people can enjoy them.
Thanks so much, Paul.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found use in this episode. If so, don't keep it to yourself. Please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. And as always, we hope you will be in the business of doing good.